Oh, hello there, and happy St. Patrick's Day. Welcome to Weekly Lit episode 31. We're just recovering from the excitement of the wildly popular Shakespeare Fest in three parts, and getting ready to address in upcoming episodes. We'll follow up on Western literature briefly, uh, a review of my book of the year so far from Sarah Gran, just a little preview. But today, a wonderful holy day, St. Patrick's Day, we're going to, of course, read from an Irish author born in Ireland, came to America, and spent much of her career here in America. Her name's Maeve Brennan, uh, a short story writer and journalist. And hope you enjoy the rest of the day, St. Patrick's Day, Eve, week, and weekend. And with no further ado, here is The Morning After the Big Fire by Maeve Brennan. From the time I was almost 5 until I was almost 18, we lived in a small house in a part of Dublin called Ranelagh. On our street, all of the houses were of red brick and had small back gardens, part cement and part grass, separated from one another by low stone walls over which, when we first moved in, I was unable to peer, although in later years I seem to remember looking over them quite easily, so I suppose they were about 5 feet high. All of the gardens had a common end wall, which was, of course, very long, since it stretched the whole length of our street. Our street was called an avenue because it was blind at one end, the farthest end from us. It was a short avenue, 26 houses on one side and 26 on the other. We were number 48, only 4 houses from the main road, Ranelagh Road, on which trams and buses and all kinds of cars ran, making a good deal of noisy traffic. Beyond the end wall of our garden lay a large tennis club, and sometimes in the summer, especially when the tournaments were on, my little sister and I used to perch in an upstairs back window and watch the players in their white dresses and white flannels and hear their voices calling the scores. There was a clubhouse, but we couldn't see it. Our view was partly obstructed by a large garage building that leaned against the end wall of our garden and the 4 other gardens between us and Ranelagh Road. A number of people who lived on our avenue kept their cars in the garage, and the people who came to play tennis parked their cars there. It was a very busy place, the garage, and I had never been in there, although we bought our groceries in a shop that was connected with it. The shop fronted on Ranelagh Road, and the shop and the garage were the property of a red-faced, gangling man and his fat, pink-haired wife, the McCrorys. Once on summer afternoons, when my sister and I went around to the shop to buy little paper cups of yellow water ice, some of the players would be there, refreshing themselves with ices and also with bottles of lemonade. Early one summer morning, when it was still dark, I heard my father's voice sounding very excited outside the door of the room in which I slept. I was about 8. My little sister slept in the same room with me. "McCrory's is on fire," my father was saying. He had been awakened by the red glare of the flames against his window. He threw on some clothes and hurried off to see what was going on, and my mother let us look at the fire from a back window, the same window from which we were accustomed to view the tennis matches. It was a really satisfactory fire with leaping flames, thick pouring smoke, and a steady roar of destruction broken by crashes as parts of the roof collapsed. My mother wondered if they had managed to save the cars, and this made us all look at the burning building with new interest and with enormous awe as we imagined the big shining cars being eaten up by the galloping fire. It was very exciting. My mother hurried us back to our front bedroom, but even there the excitement could be felt, with men calling to one another on the street and banging their front doors after them as they raced off to see the fun. Since she had decided there was no danger to our house, my mother tucked us firmly back in bed, but I could not sleep. And as soon as it grew light, I dressed myself and trotted downstairs. My father had many stories to tell. The garage was a ruin, he said, but the shop was safe. Many cars had been destroyed. No one knew how the fire had started. Some of the fellows connected with the garage had been very brave, dashing in to rescue as many cars as they could reach. The part of the building that overlooked our garden appeared charred, frail, and empty because it no longer had much in the way of a roof and its insides were gone. The air smelled very burnt. I wandered quietly out onto the avenue, which was deserted because the children had not come out to play and it was still too early for the men to be going to work. I walked up the avenue in the direction of the blind end. The people living there were too far from the garage to have been disturbed by the blaze. A woman whose little boy was a friend of mine came to her door to take in the milk. "McCrory's was burned down last night," I cried to her. What's that?" she said, very startled. "Burned to the ground," I said. "Hardly a wall left standing. A whole lot of people's cars burned up, too." She looked back over her shoulder in the direction of her kitchen, which, since all the houses were identical, was in the same position as our kitchen. "Jim," she cried, "do you hear this? McCrory's was burnt down last night, the whole place. Not a stick left." "We slept right through it," she said to me, looking as though the thought of that heavy sleep puzzled and unsettled her. Her husband hurried out to stand beside her, and I had to tell the whole story again. He said he would run around to McCrory's and take a look, and this enraged me because I wasn't allowed around there, and I knew that when he came back, he would be a greater authority than I. However, there was no time to lose. Other people were opening their front doors by now, and I wanted everyone to hear the news from me. "Did you hear the news?" I shouted to as many as I could catch up with, and of course, once I had their ear, they were fascinated by what I had to tell. One or two of the men, hurrying away to work, charged past me with such forbiddingly closed faces that I was afraid to approach them, and they continued in their ignorance down toward Ranelagh Road, causing me dreadful anguish because I knew that before they could board their trams or their bus, some officious busybody would be sure to treat them to my news. Then one woman, to whom I always afterward felt friendly, called down to me from her front bedroom window. "What's that you were telling Mrs. Pierce?" she said to me in a loud whisper. "Oh, just that McCrory's was burned to the ground last night. Nearly all the cars burnt up, too. Hardly anything left, my father says." By this time, I was being very offhand. "You don't tell me," she said, making a delighted face, and the next thing I knew, she was opening her front door, more eager for news than anybody. However, my hour of glory was short. The other children came out. Some of them were actually allowed to go around and view the wreckage, and soon the fire was mine no longer because there were others walking around who knew more about it than I did. I pretended to lose interest, although I was glad when someone, not my father, gave me a lump of twisted blackened tin off one of the cars. The tennis clubhouse had been untouched, and that afternoon the players appeared, as bright and immaculate in their snowy flannels and linens as though the smoking garage yard and the lines of charred cars through which they had picked their way to the courses could never interfere with them or impress them. It was nearing tournament time, and a man was painting the platform on which the judge was to sit, and from which a lady in a wide hat and a flowered chiffon dress would present cups and medals to the victors among the players. Now, in the sunshine, they lifted their rackets and started to play, and their intent and formal cries mingled with hoarse shouts of the men at work in the dark shambles of the garage. My little sister and I, watching from our window, could imagine that the rhythmical thud of the ball against the rackets coincided with the unidentifiable sounds we heard from the wreckage, which might have been groans or shrieks as the building, unable to recover from the fire, succumbed under it. It was not long before the McCrory's put up another garage, made of silvery corrugated metal stuff that looked garish and glaring against our garden wall. It cut off more of our view than the old building had. The new garage looked very hard and lasting, as unlikely to burn as a pot or a kettle. The beautiful green courts that had always seemed from our window to roll comfortably in the direction of the old wooden building now seemed to have turned and to be rolling away into the distance, as though they did not like the unsightly new structure and would have nothing to do with it. My father said the odds were all against another fire there, but I remembered that fine dark morning with all the excitement and my own importance, and I longed for another just like it. This time, however, I was determined to discover the blaze before my father did, and I watched the garage closely, as much as I could see, for signs that it might be getting ready to go up in flames. But I was disappointed. It stood, and still was standing, ugly as ever, when we left our house years later. Still, for a long time, I used to think that if some child should steal around there with a match one night and set it all blazing again, I would never blame her, as long as she let me be the first with the news. So that is Maeve Brennan's selection, The Morning After the Big Fire. It's from the Irish Book of Fiction, or the Penguin Book of Irish Fiction, rather, edited by Colm Toibin. My father found that collection and picked up a used copy. Great selection of short stories. A lot of the ones you would expect. Very few omissions. I think Brennan Bean's the only one that doesn't seem to be included in there. Maybe the rights weren't available at a fair price. But has Jonathan Swift all the way up to present day authors, including, as of date of publication, around 2000. So it's a little bit dated, but not much. But Joyce Trollope, Bram Stoker, as we call him, Bram Stoker in actuality, and a lot of other great authors. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this piece of Irish fiction, a nice light story, and happy St. Patrick's Day. And until next time, read harder.